I'm very, very happy to invite Sian Ferguson from the Sainsbury Family Charitable Trusts, one of the foundations that Georg mentioned. They've been heavily involved in the divestment movement in the UK and elsewhere. And Sian, thank you for coming to Vienna, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm grateful that I can speak in English, but ashamed at the same time that I can't speak in German. So please accept my thanks and my apologies simultaneously. As Adam said, I'm Sian Ferguson, and I work at the Sainsbury Family Charitable Trusts. They are, in fact, 17 different private philanthropic charitable foundations. They all operate together for economies of scale. So those trusts each have their own endowments, which they use to generate profit in order to deliver their charitable objectives. So their money, their investments are there to generate profit, but as an organisation they exist to deliver good, to be philanthropic. I manage 3 of those 17 trusts that have been around for about 25 years, and they were set up, their charitable objectives relate primarily to sustainable development. They have a long history of working on climate change, a long frustrating history of working on climate change, as which I think many of you in this room share. So for many years those trusts have been supporting grassroots organisations on renewable energy, community energy, seeking policy change, trying to get governments to put in place the right frameworks, carbon pricing, all of those sorts of things, which for a long time we believed were going to be the answer to solving the climate crisis that we now face. About 6 years ago, we supported an organisation called Carbon Tracker, and I think some of you have met Mark Campanale, and their thesis, which is now, I think, has gone around the world and has gained traction and credibility around the world, is as Georg described, that actually we cannot burn all of the fossil fuels we have and all of the fossil fuels which are on the balance books of the fossil fuel companies that most of us are invested in one way or another. We rate Carbon Tracker highly. We count that as one of our good grants, one of our better grants. You know, we're delighted to support them. Incidentally, we're also very delighted to support Greenpeace and the work that Greenpeace do in this area too. At the same time, we were becoming more actively involved as a shareholder, so using our influence, owning shares in companies, including in the fossil fuel companies, to try and get those companies to change. So we participated in shareholder activism, so posing questions at AGM, putting forward resolutions, proposals to boards, to fossil fuel boards, to Shell and BP, etc., to get them to change. But it just did not happen. Those boards did not change. The fossil fuel companies did not change. They have not changed. So in 2014, we decided that we would join some of the US foundations, the Wallace Global Fund and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, to be much more actively involved in divest, invest. So this is not just divesting from fossil fuels, but it's investing in climate solutions. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy access in emerging and pioneer economies, afforestation, sustainable food and agriculture. It's a very broad range of investment opportunities that are needed in order to, I think, progress society and deal with climate change. So why did we do this? Why did we think this aligned with our legal, financial, and charitable responsibilities? Because if I can just go back, in common with most institutional investors, whether it's pension funds, family trusts or others, we do have a responsibility to generate profit from our investments in order to deliver our charitable goals? Well, first of all, it aligned with our values. As a charity, we're set up to do good, and legally, that trumps everything else. So legally, we should not be invested in anything that undermines our charitable goals. That's not really well understood, especially amongst charities in the UK, and it's something that we're working on. Secondly, we fully understood that climate change is a financial risk to our investments, both long-term, if we go beyond 2 degrees, the financial risks to all of us are colossal. But also, even in that interim, because we're in a transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a zero-carbon economy, we know that fossil fuels are not the energy source of the future. And that trend, that transition is happening so much quicker than was anticipated, and so much quicker than the fossil fuel companies are willing to admit to. And that transition is something that even Donald Trump can't hold back, and is probably why his administration is in fact holding back from making any statements regarding the Paris Agreement. And I think finally, the reason why we did this was our legal responsibilities. As an investor, as an asset owner, we have a responsibility to take account of financial risks, all financial risks. And climate change is a massive financial risk that we need to take account of. So for us, mitigating that risk was divesting from fossil fuels and investing in climate solutions. So why particularly divest invest as a tool? Well, I mean, you'll notice divest invest really focuses attention on fossil fuel companies, and particularly on gas and oil companies. In a way, coal really is yesterday's industry. I mean, if you're still invested in coal, you're probably just not wanting to crystallize those losses you've already made. So, which I know is a tendency for all investors, including ourselves. So why focus particularly on fossil fuels and those big gas and oil companies? Well, they have enormous political influence and influence over the financial markets. But despite growing pressure from shareholders and stakeholders, they have not moved their business plans. So they are still basing their business plans on growing, on increasing fossil fuel use. That's despite all the growing knowledge and understanding we have that we are in an energy transition, that we're moving away from fossil fuels. And their business plans actually are predicted on climate change beyond 3 degrees, catastrophic climate change, well beyond the Paris Agreement. And why did, as I said, we've been working on climate change now for 20 odd years, so why did we think this would work when all of the other things we've tried, yeah, they've shifted the dial a bit, but they haven't really had a huge impact? Well, this is a relatively simple act, and it's very easy to understand, isn't it? That you take your money from something you think is a bad investment, bad financially and bad ethically, and you put it where you think it's a good investment, good financially and good ethically. But in doing that and doing it publicly, it sends a huge message. And this is where I think our approach differs slightly to the approach in Austria, and that we think this movement is not necessarily going to be driven by rational thinking and economics. It's going to be driven by cultural change, by what people believe in and what people believe is possible. And Divest Invest is that huge signal, that powerful cultural message. It sends a message to the fossil fuel companies, which they are getting worried about. It sends a message to the finance sector that their clients want something different. It sends a message to politicians, who we all know they follow when there's a mandate. They don't lead. that change is necessary. And so what was our approach in this? So we're in a unique position. We're a charitable organisation and we have investments. So we have influence in a number of spheres. So our approach to this was trying to use the agency, the influence we had in all of those. So first of all, we continue to support NGOs working in this space. So the likes of Carbon Tracker, Client Earth, who are a legal NGO, who are challenging directors' responsibilities on climate change risk, Greenpeace, grassroots organisations, so those student movements who have made a massive difference in the UK and the US. We looked at our own investments, of course, divesting from fossil fuels and investing in climate solutions. But we also wanted to use our position, not necessarily my position, but the position of the trustees, the members of the Sainsbury family, to be much more public about this and to reach out to other investors and also to the finance community, to the fund management community. It's without a doubt, other investors listen to other investors. The finance community is much more likely to listen to a client than it is to listen to an NGO. That's how the world works. So quite uncharacteristically for the trustees, so that members of the Sainsbury family, they have been much more public about this. So they have arranged events with Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England. We've hosted dinners for the bursars, for the finance directors at the universities, including Oxford and Cambridge University. We've hosted dinners for other foundations, events at COP21, events at COP22, and they have mainly been targeted at other investors and the fund management community to get them involved in this. Is it having an impact? Well, it is having a significant impact. This is not just us by any means. We are part of a huge global network now of foundations, NGOs, activists who are all working on this and all using their own spheres of influence. So as Georg said, it's over 5.2 trillion. This is divestment week. There will be a series of announcements this week. The Italian Jesuits have made a commitment to divest, invest, particularly significant as that sends a powerful signal to the Pope. And once the Vatican makes a decision to divest, invest, which I'm sure it will, that sends a signal to Catholics around the world to do the same. It's that sort of cultural shift that we need. We'll be announcing this week that about half of UK universities have now made a commitment to divest, invest. I think universities in the UK and US are very different to most universities around the world in that they have their own endowments. They're not publicly funded, so they can do this. So that student movement in the UK and US has been really important. And I know from what... We can be tricky. So we fund the students to do their activism, but we also host a dinner for the directors of the university, the finance directors of the university. So we know that they dread that knock on the door that tells them there's a sit-in outside their office of students who are demanding that the university go fossil-free. But it's been really effective. It has really worked. But despite all of this, and this is a call actually to the fund management, to the fund managers in the room, the fund management sector has not responded as we hoped it would. For us, our investments are actively managed. So it's been relatively easy to remove fossil fuel investments from there. We can just go through we review the investments we have, we can take out the fossil fuel investments, we can instruct the fund managers not to reinvest in them, and then we have a policy for investing in climate solutions. There are a range of indices that actively managed investors can use, whether they're MSCI, ET index. There's a whole range of them. There's the FTSE Divest index. And there's also a range of funds that investors like us can use. But the challenge is the mutual, the passive, the retail funds. And that's the key to unlocking this. And this is, I think, where your attention has been focused a lot of the time, because I think you understand, I understand, that actually once you have those in place, money can begin to flow into them. People don't have to be activist investors. They can just, put their money. Those funds will perform well. We know historically from looking at funds where fossil fuels have been taken out, there isn't a financial impact. But those funds just don't exist at the moment. We don't have any in the UK, and I think you have very limited options here in Austria. And that's one of our goals. One of our goals is about getting passive funds. So we, earlier this year, we surveyed fund managers in the UK. So the fund managers operating in the UK, the ones with the biggest assets under management. So the likes of BlackRock, which is the world's largest fund management company, LGIM, the world's second largest fund management company, Schroders, etc. And because we wanted to know what their plans were about fossil-free investment products, both for active and passive investors. We wanted to know if they were seeing an increase in demand from clients for these sorts of products. We also wanted to know how they were viewing risk associated with fossil fuel investments, so the stranded asset risk, the carbon bubble risk that Georg spoke about. So first of all, interest in fossil-free products. They have seen a 50% increase in the last 12 months, which is an increase on previous years. So there is growing client demand for these products. And what about risks associated with fossil fuels? Well, we identified 4 different risks facing the finance community. One is a regulatory risk. We're seeing increasing amounts of regulation relating to this. It's not necessarily climate change. Some of it is related to air quality too, but regulation that's going to affect investments in fossil fuels. Transition risk, so how quickly we're moving away from fossil fuels to zero carbon technologies. Litigation risks, so the fact that fossil fuel companies are being challenged legally through the courts, as we've seen with Exxon, and also now with BP and Shell. And reputational risks, so the stigma of remaining invested in companies which are contrary to the Paris Agreement, which are driving climate change. Now, I thought the companies would come back and give us a timescale when those risks would affect the valuation of fossil fuel companies to some time in the distant, but they didn't. The majority of those companies, BlackRock, LGIM, believe that fossil fuel companies will be revalued within 5 years. I mean, that's no time at all. So while we know that fossil fuel companies, or not coal but gas and oil, are reliable sources of dividend and capital growth, there is a growing view, not only amongst us, but within the fund management community, that won't last. Now, we know they're still paying dividend. They're still under pressure to pay dividend from those fund management companies. They are borrowing money from the bank in order to pay the dividend because it's not coming out of profit. But we all know that the fund management sector, their performance is measured relative to each other and relative to a benchmark. So while they all remain invested in these companies, there is no incentive for them not to be invested in them. Which is why Divest Invest is really important, because it's actually requiring investment professionals to find better investments. It's putting the onus on asset owners to call them out about this and put in place better investment products which can align with the transition to a low-carbon economy. Now, I have been speaking quite loosely about fossil-free products and divestment products. But for those, I think, in the finance sector will know, it's really not that straightforward, is it? What is fossil fuel free? And one of the pushbacks we've had from the fund management community is that what investors want is not clearly articulated. They say they want fossil fuel free, but they don't really know what that means. It can mean the companies with the largest fossil fuel reserves. It can also mean the companies that service those companies. It's a whole range of companies which are tied up in the fossil fuel sector, and they may not be just in the fossil fuel sector. You know, they may have some of their business in that, some of their business in other sectors. So what it's really important for us to do is to be clear about what it is we're asking for in these new products, what we're wanting not to be invested in, and what we are wanting to be invested in. There's a range of NGOs in the UK, many of whom operate internationally, so Greenpeace, WWF, some large membership bodies in the UK, and all of those NGOs want to have fossil fuel pensions. None of them are big enough or have a mandate to do it on their own. So what they've decided to do is to work together to be able to influence the fund management sector to develop a product. So the first stage of that has been designing a survey so they can be very clear, they can work out what they want in terms of what they don't want to be invested in, what they do want to be invested in, how willing they are to deviate from the benchmark. It could be positive deviation, remember, not just negative deviation. And then present that to their pension providers, to the fund managers who are interested in developing products for them. And that survey has gone down so well that LGIM, which is the second largest fund manager in the world, has asked if it can use it for other clients, for its university clients and other clients who are interested in this. So I'm wanting to end what I say with an offer to fund managers in the room and others to say, we'll happily share this with you if you want to start, I think, defining more clearly with your clients what it is they want to be invested in, to have that clarification. And we know that LGIM, for example, has said that it would be willing to seed fund that sort of, a retailer passive product with 100 million if other pension fund investors, small investors, come in. I want to finish by saying divest, invest will continue to grow as a movement. And we've heard that we all need to move away from fossil fuels, both because they're driving climate change, but also because they're not a good investment. And I think the question to pose yourselves, I think for all of you here, because we all have agency, whether it's through our professional position in the organisations that we're in, or personally, in terms of our own pension funds, etc., is why would you want to stay invested in fossil fuels? And what agency do you have to be able to make that shift? Whether it's making a call to your company pension scheme or your own pension scheme, just to check, am I invested in fossil fuels and what's the risk to me in doing that, or professionally in terms of looking for those other opportunities.